Colonel Marcus Webb had been in the Army for 28 years. He'd served in 3 different war zones, commanded 2 battalions, and earned enough ribbons to fill a display case. At 53 years old, he considered himself a man who knew his place in the world. And more importantly, he knew everyone else's place, too. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, he sat in Maggie's diner on the edge of Fort Jackson in South Carolina. The small restaurant was a local favorite, known for its meatloaf and sweet tea. Military personnel mixed with townspeople in the red vinyl booths, creating a comfortable buzz of conversation. Marcus was halfway through his club sandwich when she walked in. She was maybe 5'6", slender, with graying brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, a plain white blouse and khaki pants, and carried herself with quiet confidence. She looked to be in her early 50s. Nothing about her screamed military, but something about the way she moved caught his attention. She took a seat at the counter, just 3 stools down from where Marcus sat at a small table. He watched as she ordered coffee and a Caesar salad. When the waitress called her ma'am without any military courtesy, Marcus relaxed. Just another civilian, he thought. His lunch companion, Captain Jerry Hoskins, arrived 10 minutes late, full of apologies. Jerry was 32, ambitious, and always eager to impress senior officers. He slid into the booth across from Marcus, slightly out of breath. "Sorry, sir. The briefing ran long." "They always do," Marcus said, waving it off. "Order something. We've got time." As they ate, their conversation drifted to the usual topics: base politics, upcoming promotions, problem soldiers. Marcus had opinions about everything, and he wasn't shy about sharing them. His voice carried in the small diner, confident and commanding. "The problem with the Army today," he said, loud enough that several people glanced over, "is that we've gone soft. Too worried about feelings, too worried about being inclusive." He took a bite of his sandwich. "In my day, we didn't need our hands held." Jerry nodded along, though he looked slightly uncomfortable. Marcus continued, warming to his subject. "And don't get me started on the diversity initiatives. Putting people in positions they're not ready for, just to check a box. It weakens the whole structure." The woman at the counter shifted slightly, her coffee cup pausing halfway to her lips. But she didn't turn around. "Take the new general they're sending to oversee the base transition," Marcus went on. "Word is it's a woman, someone from the Pentagon. Probably never spent a real day in the field." He snorted. "I give her 6 months before she's transferred to some desk job where she belongs." Jerry's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, we don't actually know." "I know enough," Marcus interrupted. "I've seen it before. They promote someone because it looks good on paper, and the rest of us have to clean up the mess." He leaned back, satisfied with his assessment. "Mark my words, this whole thing is going to be a disaster." The woman at the counter set down her coffee cup with a soft click. She pulled out her wallet, left cash on the counter, and stood up. As she walked past Marcus's table, he caught a glimpse of something on her wrist, a simple military watch, the kind issued to officers. For just a moment she paused. Her eyes met his, and Marcus saw something there that made him pause. Intelligence, strength, authority. But then she was gone, the door chiming softly behind her. "Who was that?" Jerry asked quietly. Marcus shrugged. "Nobody important." But something nagged at him, something about the way she'd looked at him. He pushed the feeling aside and finished his lunch. 2 hours later, Marcus stood in Conference Room A at the base headquarters. The room was packed with officers, all waiting for the official introduction of their new commanding general. The position oversaw all operations at Fort Jackson, making it one of the most important posts on the East Coast. Marcus straightened his uniform and checked his ribbons. First impressions mattered, and he wanted the new general, whoever she was, to know that he was a man to be respected. The door opened, and the base adjutant called the room to attention, and in walked the woman from the diner. For a moment, Marcus thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but no, it was definitely her. The woman who'd been sitting at the counter, listening to every word he'd said. Except now she wore the uniform of a two-star general, complete with ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career spanning 3 decades. "At ease," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Please be seated." The room rustled as everyone took their chairs. Marcus felt his face growing hot. His mind raced, replaying everything he'd said at the diner. Every careless word, every dismissive comment. "For those who don't know me, I'm Major General Sarah Chen. I've spent the last 5 years at the Pentagon, but before that, I commanded combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've served as a platoon leader, a company commander, a battalion commander, and a brigade commander." She paused, letting that sink in. "I've earned my place here, just as each of you has earned yours." Marcus's stomach dropped. Jerry, sitting beside him, had gone pale. General Chen continued her introduction, outlining her vision for Fort Jackson and her expectations for the leadership team. She was articulate, knowledgeable, and impressive. Everything Marcus had assumed she wouldn't be. "Now," she said, pulling out a paper from her folder, "I understand there's been some speculation about my appointment, some concerns about whether I'm qualified." Her eyes scanned the room and landed for just a moment on Marcus. "I want to address that head on. I believe in transparency and direct communication. So if anyone has questions or concerns about my leadership, my door is always open." The room was silent. No one moved. "Very well," General Chen said. "I'll be meeting with each department head individually this week. My adjutant will send out the schedule. Colonel Webb, I'd like to see you first thing tomorrow morning. 0800 hours. Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. He managed a stiff nod. "Yes, ma'am." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but Marcus barely heard any of it. His mind was spinning. Had she recognized him? Of course she had. That look she'd given him in the diner. She'd known exactly what she was doing. She'd let him dig his own grave. When the meeting finally ended, Marcus stood quickly, hoping to slip out before anyone could comment. But Jerry caught his arm. "Sir, was that—" "Not now, Captain," Marcus said through gritted teeth. He made it back to his office and closed the door. For the first time in years, Colonel Marcus Webb felt genuinely rattled. He'd made a career out of reading situations, understanding power dynamics, knowing who to impress and how. And in the span of one lunch hour, he'd completely misread the most important person on the entire base. His phone buzzed. An email from General Chen's office confirming his 0800 meeting. Below it was another email, this one from Jerry. "Sir, should we discuss damage control?" Marcus stared at his computer screen. Damage control, as if there was any way to control this particular damage. He'd insulted his commanding general to her face, or at least to her back, before he'd even known who she was. He thought about calling some of his connections, trying to get ahead of the situation. But what would he say? That he'd shot his mouth off in a public diner? That he'd made assumptions based on nothing but his own prejudice? The truth was, he had no one to blame but himself. He spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on paperwork, but his mind kept drifting back to that meeting, to the way General Chen had looked at him. Not angry, exactly. Not even disappointed. Just aware. She knew exactly who he was now and what he thought of her. That evening, Marcus drove home to his small house off base. His wife, Linda, had dinner waiting. She took one look at his face and frowned. "Bad day?" "You could say that," Marcus muttered, dropping his briefcase by the door. Over dinner, he told her everything. Linda listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he'd always loved about her. She didn't judge, didn't lecture. She just listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So what are you going to do?" "What can I do? Apologize. Grovel, probably." Linda shook her head. "That's not what I mean. I mean, what are you really going to do? Are you going to actually change your mind about what you said?" Or are you just sorry you got caught? The question hit harder than Marcus expected. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. I raised some fair points, he said finally, about standards, about the way the military is changing. Did you? Linda asked. Or did you just make assumptions about someone you didn't know, based on absolutely nothing? Marcus felt a flash of anger. You weren't there. You don't know how it is. You're right, Linda said calmly. I wasn't there. But Marcus, I've been married to you for 30 years. I love you. And I'm telling you, this might be the wake-up call you need. He wanted to argue. He wanted to defend himself. But somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. Marcus arrived at General Chen's office 15 minutes early. He'd barely slept, running through possible conversations in his head. Should he address the diner incident immediately? Wait for her to bring it up? Pretend it never happened? The general's secretary, a sharp-eyed staff sergeant, directed him to wait. Marcus sat in an uncomfortable chair, watching the clock tick toward 0800. At exactly 8 o'clock, the office door opened. Colonel Webb, the general will see you now. General Chen's office was surprisingly simple. No ego wall covered in photos and awards. Just a clean desk, a few family pictures, and a bookshelf filled with military history and leadership texts. She stood as he entered, and they exchanged salutes. Have a seat, Colonel. Marcus sat, his back straight, hands on his knees. He felt like a cadet again, called before the commandant. General Chen settled into her chair and opened a folder. I've been reviewing your record. Very impressive. Bronze Star, 2 meritorious service medals, excellent performance reviews across the board. Your last commander called you one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to serve with. Thank you, ma'am. She looked up from the folder. So I have to wonder, what happened yesterday at Maggie's diner? There it was. Direct, no games. Marcus took a breath. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. What I said was unprofessional, unfounded, and completely inappropriate. There's no excuse for it. You're right, General Chen said simply. There isn't. The silence stretched between them. Marcus forced himself not to fidget. But I'm less interested in your apology, she continued, than I am in understanding your thinking. You made some strong statements yesterday about diversity initiatives, about women in leadership, about me specifically, though you didn't know it at the time. She leaned forward slightly. So, tell me, Colonel, do you actually believe those things? Or were you just talking? It was a trap, Marcus thought. Either way, he answered, he'd be condemning himself. But looking into General Chen's eyes, he realized she wasn't playing games. She genuinely wanted to know. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Granted. Marcus chose his words carefully. I've been in the Army most of my adult life. I've seen it change a lot over the years. Some of those changes have been good. Others, he hesitated. Others have felt forced, like we're more concerned with how things look than how they actually work. Give me an example. 2 years ago, I had a lieutenant transferred into my unit. She'd been fast-tracked through some leadership program. Good on paper, but she wasn't ready. She made decisions that put people at risk. Marcus met the general's eyes. When I tried to address it through proper channels, I was told to be more supportive, to give her more time. Meanwhile, my men suffered. What happened to her? She transferred out 6 months later, took a Pentagon job. General Chen nodded slowly. And from that one experience, you concluded that all women, all diversity initiatives, all changes to military culture are failures? Put that way, it sounded ridiculous. Marcus felt his face heat up. I didn't say— You did, Colonel. Yesterday, in that diner, you absolutely did say that. Her voice wasn't angry, but it was firm. You took one data point and made it a universal truth. And in doing so, you dismissed every qualified woman who's ever served, including me. Marcus wanted to defend himself, but he couldn't find the words, because she was right. General Chen pulled out another file. Let me share some data points with you. Last year, units with diverse leadership teams showed 23% better problem-solving outcomes. Retention rates improved, morale improved, and perhaps most importantly, those units better reflected the country they serve. She slid several papers across the desk toward him. I'm not asking you to abandon your standards, Colonel. I'm asking you to examine them. Are you demanding excellence? Or are you simply demanding that everyone look and think like you? The question landed like a punch. Marcus stared at the papers in front of him, not really seeing them. I've been in your position, General Chen continued, her voice softening slightly. Early in my career, I had a battalion commander who didn't think women belonged in combat roles. He made my life hell, questioned every decision, scrutinized every action. You know what I learned from him? Marcus looked up. I learned that I had to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. So I worked twice as hard. I studied twice as long. I pushed myself beyond what any reasonable person would expect. She paused. And I learned that his prejudice said everything about him and nothing about me. Ma'am, she held up a hand. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Colonel. I'm telling you because I suspect you're a better officer than what I saw yesterday. Your record suggests it. Your former commanders confirm it. But right now, you're letting your assumptions limit your effectiveness. Marcus sat in silence, processing her words. Outside the window, he could see troops doing morning PT, their movements synchronized and purposeful. I need to know something, General Chen said. Can you work for me? Can you respect my authority and my decisions, even when they challenge your preconceptions? It was the moment of truth. Marcus could give her the easy answer, the political answer, or he could be honest. I don't know, ma'am, he said finally, but I'd like the chance to try. For the first time since he'd entered the office, General Chen smiled slightly. That's the first completely honest thing you've said to me. I appreciate it. 3 weeks passed. Marcus threw himself into his work, trying to prove, to General Chen and to himself, that he could adapt. He was careful about what he said and where he said it. He attended every meeting, completed every task, and kept his opinions to himself. But careful wasn't the same as changed. The real test came on a Thursday morning when General Chen announced a new initiative. She was creating a task force to redesign the base's leadership training program, and she wanted it co-chaired by Marcus and Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Morrison. Patricia was 42, a West Point graduate with 2 combat tours and a reputation for innovative thinking. She was also everything Marcus had privately complained about, a woman promoted quickly, a beneficiary of the diversity programs he'd questioned. The first planning meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. Marcus arrived to find Patricia already there, spreading documents across the conference table. She looked up when he entered and gave him a professional nod. Colonel Webb. Colonel Morrison. They stood awkwardly for a moment before sitting down on opposite sides of the table. Patricia spoke first. I'll be direct. I know about what happened at Maggie's diner. Word gets around. She met his eyes. General Chen specifically assigned us to work together. I suspect this is a test, for both of us. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. I'm aware. Good. So here's what I propose. We put aside whatever personal issues might exist and focus on doing excellent work. We don't have to be friends. We just have to be professional. It was a reasonable suggestion. Marcus knew that, but part of him bristled at being handled so efficiently. Agreed, he said stiffly. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing the current leadership training program, identifying weaknesses, and brainstorming improvements. Patricia was sharp, Marcus had to admit. She asked tough questions and pushed back on ideas that didn't hold up to scrutiny, including his. With respect, sir, that approach is outdated, she said when Marcus suggested maintaining the current physical fitness standards without modification. The military has evolved. We need leaders who can adapt to complex, changing environments. That requires more than just physical strength. Physical fitness is fundamental to military readiness, Marcus countered. I'm not disagreeing. I'm saying we need to expand our definition of readiness. Patricia pulled up a presentation on her laptop. Look at these case studies from recent operations. The officers who performed best weren't necessarily the ones who could do the most push-ups. They were the ones who could think critically under pressure, who could build coalitions with local populations, who could navigate political complexity. Marcus studied the data. He wanted to dismiss it, but he couldn't. The evidence was clear. You're saying physical standards don't matter? I'm saying they're not sufficient. We need both. Patricia looked at him steadily. And I think you know that. I think you're pushing back because I'm the one saying it. The observation stung because it was at least partially true. Marcus set down his pen. You're right, he said quietly. I apologize. Patricia looked surprised. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to say it, Marcus admitted. But General Chen told me I needed to examine my assumptions. I'm trying to do that. It's harder than I thought it would be. Something shifted in the room. The tension didn't disappear entirely, but it loosened slightly. Can I ask you something? Patricia said. What did I do to make you distrust me? Before we ever met, before we ever worked together, what made you decide I wasn't qualified? Marcus opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped himself. Honesty, he reminded himself. That's what General Chen had asked for. Nothing, he said finally. You didn't do anything. I made assumptions based on fear. Fear of what? Fear that the military I've known my entire adult life is disappearing. Fear that I don't understand the new rules. Fear that officers like you represent a future where officers like me don't fit anymore. It was the most vulnerable thing Marcus had said to anyone besides Linda in years. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I understand that fear, she said finally. More than you might think. Do you know how many people assume I only got promoted because I'm a woman? How many times I've had to prove myself when men with identical records were simply believed? The military you're afraid of losing, the one where people like you automatically fit in, never existed for people like me. Marcus had no response to that. They sat in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. So what do we do? He asked. Patricia gathered her papers. We do the work. We build a training program that's genuinely excellent, not one that preserves the old ways or that changes everything just for the sake of change. We figure out what really matters and we fight for that. She looked at him. Can you do that? Can you work with me as an equal, not as someone you have to tolerate? It was the same question General Chen had asked, phrased differently. And this time, Marcus's answer came more easily. I can try. And this time, I really mean it. Patricia studied his face, then nodded. Then let's get to work. Over the next several weeks, Marcus and Patricia built something neither of them could have created alone. Patricia brought fresh perspectives and data-driven insights. Marcus brought decades of experience and practical knowledge. They argued, compromised, and pushed each other. And slowly, Marcus began to realize something. His fear hadn't been about standards dropping. It had been about his own relevance disappearing, about becoming obsolete in a military that looked different from the one he'd known. But working with Patricia showed him that experience still mattered, wisdom still mattered. He just had to be willing to pair them with openness to new ideas. Part 5. The Transformation. 2 months after the diner incident, General Chen called a base-wide assembly. Every officer and senior NCO gathered in the main auditorium. Marcus sat in the third row, Patricia beside him. They'd just finished the final draft of their training program proposal. General Chen took the stage, and the room fell silent. When I arrived at Fort Jackson, I knew I faced skepticism, she began. Some of it was spoken aloud, some of it wasn't, but all of it was real. Her eyes swept the room. I want to talk today about what it means to lead in a changing military. She clicked to her first slide. This is Colonel Marcus Webb. Marcus felt his stomach drop as his official photo appeared on the screen. Beside him, Patricia gave him a sympathetic look. 2 months ago, Colonel Webb didn't know who I was, and he made some assumptions about my qualifications based on nothing more than rumors and his own preconceptions. General Chen looked directly at Marcus. Colonel, would you join me on stage, please? Marcus felt every eye in the auditorium turn toward him. His heart pounded as he stood and made his way to the stage. This was it. Public humiliation. The end of his career. But when he reached the stage, General Chen handed him a microphone. Tell them what happened, she said simply. Marcus looked out at hundreds of faces, colleagues, subordinates, people he'd served with for years. His mouth went dry. Then he saw Linda sitting in the back row. She nodded encouragingly. I made a mistake, Marcus said, his voice rough. A serious one. I heard that our new commanding general was a woman, and I assumed she wasn't qualified. I said so, publicly and loudly, and I said it where General Chen could hear me, though I didn't know it at the time. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus pushed forward. I've been forced to examine why I made those assumptions. And the truth is, they came from fear. Fear that I didn't understand the changing military. Fear that my experience didn't matter anymore. Fear that I was being left behind. He paused. But those were my issues. They had nothing to do with General Chen's qualifications or anyone else's. General Chen stepped forward. Thank you, Colonel. You can return to your seat. But Marcus shook his head. There's more, ma'am, if I may. She nodded. General Chen didn't just call me out for my mistake. She gave me a chance to grow from it. She paired me with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison. He gestured toward Patricia, on a project that challenged everything I thought I knew. And together, we created something better than either of us could have done alone. Marcus looked directly at the general. I learned that excellence doesn't have one face. It doesn't sound one way or come from one background. Real strength is being willing to question yourself, to admit when you're wrong, and to learn from people you might have dismissed. He handed the microphone back to General Chen and returned to his seat, his hands shaking slightly. Patricia squeezed his shoulder as he sat down. General Chen continued her presentation, unveiling the new leadership training program Marcus and Patricia had developed. She highlighted specific innovations, giving credit to both of them. The program balanced traditional military values with modern leadership science. It was comprehensive, challenging, and genuinely excellent. When the assembly ended, Marcus was swarmed by colleagues. Some wanted to shake his hand for his honesty. Others clearly thought he'd been made an example of. A few senior officers pulled him aside with knowing looks. They'd had their own moments of reckoning, their own lessons in humility. But the person Marcus most wanted to talk to was General Chen. He found her in her office an hour later reviewing paperwork. Ma'am, do you have a moment?